Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, in their book The Communist Manifesto, opened it with the line, "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle." I think that's actually slightly inaccurate, because hunter-gatherer society counts as society, and that wasn't defined by class struggle. What they really should have said was the history of all civilization so far, which means everything after agriculture. With agriculture, productivity raised for the first time to the point where we had a surplus. And that right there is the germ of exploitation, because there was a build-up of wealth for the first time beyond what people needed to survive. And although these things were never done consciously, the exploitation that followed from that had a productive role, because rather than spreading the wealth evenly amongst everyone in a condition of genuine poverty, it concentrated the wealth into the hands of a few and allowed them to raise themselves to a cultural level where they could actually drive the rest of society forward. And I want to talk about that entire track from agriculture up to now, and the changes in the system of organization that have happened along the way, and how in each step things became more productive. Now, to go back to their original line about society being defined by class struggle, that emerges from the exploitation. When you get the original people who appropriated the wealth of others, they raised themselves up into the first aristocracy. And that's a kind of exploitation that went on for thousands and thousands of years. People, through their ownership of land, appropriated the wealth of those people working on the land. And that was the defining social order. Basically two classes competing with each other, the aristocracy and the peasantry. The French Revolution, previous to that, the English Revolution, developments in Holland, were the first time that the aristocracy became displaced by the richest peasants who had become in their own right a separate social class, the capitalists, the bourgeoisie. And I want to talk about why capitalism represented such a huge jump on the rule of the aristocracy, which by the end had become high feudalism. If you look at this map in front of us here, that is feudal France. And you're not looking at divisions within a nation as we would understand them today. These are genuinely separate political entities. And how do I put this? What really drives the need for revolution is that over time a particular social order develops the economy it rules over to the point where its manner of rule can no longer fully harness it. So, to look at this map, you have many different feudal lords ruling over these tiny little territories, but over centuries of their rule, France had become more economically dynamic, more productive, and communication in particular has raised to such a level that it could function as a much larger political and social entity. And because the competition between the feudal lords was so fierce, they could never have been relied on to make that unification. So that's where the capitalists come in. They form France into a huge nation state, which can be a great deal more productive, and it would have been foolish for them to not try to do that, instead to take each little feudal district and keep it as an independent place but develop it to capitalism, because you miss most of the potential of raising to a higher level. And the reason I'm going on about this so long is because I want to explain why in our conception of socialism we always insist that it has to be a world socialist order. And it's for largely the same reason. In the way that these feudal states had become, reactionary is the right word, but it might be more accurate to say just inefficient, is because they weren't harnessing the economy on the grand scale that it could have been. And that's where we are today. These nation states are just as backward and inefficient as the feudal states of old were. And in the same way that the feudal lords were incapable of, not incapable of recognizing it, but incapable of getting over their competition with each other and joining together into a nation state, the capitalists of each nation state will never get over their competition with each other and will never see a one world human society. Which is why, just as the capitalist class had to overthrow the aristocracy, the working class of the world now has to overthrow capitalism so that we can have a one world order and, in so many different ways, a more efficient economy. And let's talk about Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels again, and what they did at the same time as they published the Communist Manifesto to try to actually drive forward that World Socialist order. And that is the First International. The first international effort driven by the working class to unite the world under one banner. And eventually I'm going to take along through all four communist internationals that have existed and why we need to revive this idea and why working class people around the world need to look beyond national boundaries and find an extreme sense of solidarity together because we have the same struggle before us to unite the world under our own power. The First International collapsed, not according to this Wikipedia article, but in my opinion because of the failure of the Paris Commune, which was the first effort of workers to really take control of a country. And they tried to take control of France after France had lost in fairly spectacular fashion to Prussia in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. I won't go into why that failed, but that's what brought down the First International. The Second International is the one that fell apart after World War I. And for a long time before that, it had done some great things. Everyone saw World War I coming. Like, it wasn't as if a gigantic arms build-up going on for a decade was going to escape people's notice. The world empires, Germany, France, England, were preparing to duke it out to see who gets to rule the world. Now, of course, for England, this meant defending their position. They had already conquered the world. Germany, a new nation, more powerful, wanted to make a play to take things over. And the various social democratic parties of the different European countries had come together and said that we will not allow this to happen. If the capitalists try to send millions upon millions of us toward deaths in a futile struggle for who gets to rule the world, who gets to unite the world, then we won't let them. We'll turn the World War into a world revolution. Now, opportunist elements had taken a hold of Marxism in the intervening period between the First and Second Internationals, and the Second International disgraced itself at the outset of World War I, when the vast majority of the national sections, rather than holding to that pledge they had made to each other to resist the war, actually backed the war. England, France, Germany, honestly, the vast majority sided with their own national capitalist class and supported World War I. Although there were sporadic members in each country who opposed this, only two national sections actually opposed it, which was the Russian Social Democratic Party and the Serbian. And of course, the Russian party was led by Lenin. After the Russian Revolution, they decided to break with the Second International, which had disgraced itself, and form the Third International. This was more powerful than any had been before because it was backed by a successful workers' revolution and the first democratic workers' state in history, Russia. As we all know, things did not go well for the Russian Revolution. It, for one thing, fell outside the scheme originally envisioned by Marx, which was that the most powerful capitalist countries would be the first to turn socialist, and therefore would have a tremendous economic advantage over the rest of the world because you have a fully developed, powerful capitalist economy raised to a new level immediately by the more efficient socialist order. What happened in Russia is that you get a massive increase in efficiency and you get a much more dynamic society, but it's not a magic trick. If it started with an incredibly poor and backward semi-feudal economy, That's not going to guarantee you superiority over the likes of Germany or England or America, which prior to the revolution had been on a much higher level of capitalist development. So the Civil War, which was basically a euphemism for a massive international imperialist invasion led by Germany, England, America, France, I want to say over 20 different countries. They cut the head off the revolution. They killed all the best revolutionaries in the Civil War, and the society degenerated. The bureaucracy, which had emerged as a result of that exact poverty and the very fact that that prelude for socialism, having enough to go around, wasn't there. You need people to police the breadlines. You need people who decide who gets what in an environment when there simply isn't enough. That bureaucracy took control of the Russian economy and, by extension, took control of the Communist International, the Third International. As a result, what had been a massive, powerful force for revolution in the world became corrupted and started to sabotage revolutions. This bureaucracy, which had taken control of Russia, had every reason to fear further revolutions along the line of the Russian Revolution, because a successful German working class, having taken control, would not have stood by and allowed their Russian comrades to be oppressed like that, would have overthrown the Stalinist bureaucracy. So the Third International became a really perfidious, or what's the word, pernicious force in the world, and that necessitated the foundation of the Fourth International, just as the disgrace of the Second International had necessitated the formation of the Third. So on to that. Leon Trotsky, who had escaped Stalin's purges and fled into exile, tried his damnedest to set up a competing international that wasn't corrupted. But with the Soviet Union still in existence and still, for a lot of people, forming an inspirational example, the Fourth International never really got going. It's not accurate really to say that it collapsed, but it never became a coherent one world international. And rather than arguing for us setting up the Fifth International, really I want to argue for us making a more solid go at the Fourth. We need today, for so many reasons, to deal with global warming, to deal with global poverty and hunger, to deal with the migration problem. I mean, the essence of why we have mass immigration into Western countries or into advanced countries in general is because of the giant economic imbalance, because capitalism, having taken over the world, has failed to develop the world. And the reason we need workers' power is so that we can develop all corners of the world and we don't get these massive population fluctuations. We need to solve global warming. We need to colonize fucking space. We have so many things that have become possible with our new high level of productivity and technique and development that capitalism, just like the feudal lords of old, is inequipped to really handle. So that's just a brief sketch. That's the concept of a workers' international. It's some measure of an argument as to why we need one. I'll leave it at that. Feel free to come back at me with any questions. And just one last comment. The CWI is the proto Fourth International that I ascribe to. It's not large. It has, it's how to put this, it's a template. It's a scaffolding that we can use to try to build a new international. I suggest checking out this site, socialistworld.net. If you're in America, you can speak to Socialist Alternative. If you're in Ireland, like I am, you can speak to the Socialist Party. In England, it's also called the Socialist Party. In France, it's Gauche Revolutionnaire. 40 countries, I believe, have sections of the CWI. And as I say, it's a template. It's an idea. It's a glimpse of what we really need, which is a large, dynamic, international organization of working class people who have solidarity with each other and will not allow the capitalist class of their countries to go to war with each other, and will actively seek to overthrow those capitalists so that the world can unite in a genuine way without exploitation or repression. I'm rambling, obviously. Yeah, let's just leave it right there. Thank you very much.